In this section, the following items will be covered. The title of your paper is one of the most important factors for its acceptance and citation in the future. Therefore, it is highly recommended to dedicate enough time to choose the best title for your research paper. The title of your research paper should be short and comprehensive, including all aspects of your investigation. If the selected title is long, it is suggested to divide it into two parts using comma or colon. For example, dielectric elastomers as electromechanical transducers, fundamentals, materials, devices, models, and applications of an emerging electroactive polymer technology. Avoid using abbreviations in your title. For example, application of ML in renewable energy. Here ML is an abbreviation for machine learning. However, it is highly recommended to use machine learning in the title instead of ML. The title of your paper can be a question. For example, how global warming can endanger human lives. If your paper is a review paper, it is suggested to mention it in the title. For instance, deep learning, a review, deep learning, a critical review, deep learning, an overview, a literature review on deep learning. If your work is experimental, it is suggested to mention it in the title. For example, an experimental investigation of the effects of temperature on the hydrogen explosion, or the effects of temperature on the hydrogen explosion, an experimental investigation. If your research is a numerical, analytical, or computational investigation, it is suggested to mention it in the title. For example, numerical analysis of multifunctional photonic crystal logic gates, or semantic space theory, an analytical approach. If your research covers both experimental and computational, it is better to mention them in the topic. For instance, experimental and numerical investigations on dynamic mechanical responses, or properties of bimetallic steel bar, an experimental and computational study. Avoid using titles that indicate your work is unique or the best in your research area. Although your investigation might be unique and brand new in your research area, it is not recommended to use phrases such as the best, the most important, the first, in your title or even in the abstract or body of your paper. The abstract is a summary of your investigation and one of the most important parts of your research paper. A poor abstract convinces the reviewers to reject your paper. However, a detailed abstract encourages the reviewers to review your work carefully. The abstract is written based on the body of your paper and the results. In the abstract, the first sentence is important. Hence, it should be straightforward. Example, this investigation focuses on improving the airflow distribution in data centers. Avoid using general sentences in the abstract. For example, global warming is one of the most important issues in recent years. To prove to the reviewers that your research is important, highlight the problem statement in 1 or 2 sentences. Also, highlight the novelty of your research paper. Mention the methodology of your research. If your work is experimental, mention it. If it is numerical, computational, or analytical, mention the employed software. At the end of the abstract, mention the most important quantitative results of your research in 2 or 3 sentences. If your work is a review paper, the most important achievements of the review should be mentioned here. Based on the selected journal for submitting your paper, the abstract is limited to 150, 200, 250, or 300 words. Consider the journal's rules before writing your abstract. It is very important to select the best keywords for your research, especially when it is published by a journal. Using these keywords, other researchers can find your paper in Google Scholar, Scopus, or other databases, and cite your paper. If your keywords are not related to the research, a negative point will be considered by the reviewers. It is highly recommended to choose the best keywords that represent your entire research. Avoid using general words such as fuel, solar, or technology as the keywords. The keywords should be more specific. Based on the journal's rules, you should select 3 to 6 different keywords. If there are abbreviations in the manuscript, do not forget to list them before the introduction. If you use a term such as greenhouse gas for the first time in your paper, mention its abbreviation, GHG, and in the rest of the manuscript, just use the related abbreviation. If you use equations in the manuscript, list the acronyms before the introduction section. In this section, you should develop your ideas and the reasons behind writing the paper. This section includes developing a problem statement, literature review, recent development in your research topic, objectives of your research, methodology, and scopes of the work. Avoid reviewing old documents. It is highly recommended to cite published documents from the past 20 years. Just review the works completely related to your topic, and avoid jumping to the areas that are not related to your research. The reviewed papers should support your ideas. Avoid citing documents against your research, unless you have acceptable evidence. If you cite a famous or highly cited document, or a document that you think is impressive, it is okay to mention the name of the first author in the manuscript. For example, Jackson, et al., reference number 10. If the other documents mention that the topic of your research has not been appropriately investigated, or more research is required, it is a good idea to highlight that in the literature review section. Clearly mention your research objectives, including 2, 3, or even more items. Clearly define the scopes of your research. For example, if your research covers an experiment about the combustion of solid fuel, clearly mention that the work is experimental, the employed fuel is solid, and the target is to evaluate the emissions. In this condition, the reviewers do not expect to see numerical results, liquid fuels, or efficiency analyses in the results and discussion section. Develop the methodology in detail. If your work is experimental, add a sketch or a photo of your experimental setup. If your research is numerical, illustrate the details of the studied works in the methodology section. Avoid using low-quality photos or graphs. There are no standards for the number of graphs or tables in this section. However, try to present different results of your research as much as you can. High-quality graphs and figures. Try to explain the details of each graph or table in 1, 2, or even 3 paragraphs. It is a good idea to cite other documents that support your results. If your results are different from previous works, you should mention the reasons, and if you believe that the previous works are wrong, you should explain the details politely. If your work is numerical or computational, explain the validation and verification of your study in detail. If your paper is a review paper, you do not have results. So, you just have a discussion section. Do not forget to cite all employed equations. The conclusion is different from the abstract. It is better to use the past tense in this section, as you have already finished your study and now discuss the research that you have done. Explain your research briefly. Try to address the defined objectives one by one. For instance, if you mentioned 3 objectives in the body of your paper, all mentioned objectives should be addressed in conclusion. In conclusion, mention the most important quantitative results that were not mentioned in the abstract. Avoid using the sentences not covered in the body or results and discussion of your paper, although they are related to your topic. Avoid writing a very long or very short conclusion. Avoid citing other documents in conclusion. Do not forget that it is your conclusion, not others. There are no standards for the number of citations, but in review papers, it is suggested to review more than 50 scientific documents. If you cite more than 100 documents, that would be helpful to show the reviewers that you have considered various aspects of the studied topic. In articles, experimental, numerical, try to cite more than 40 papers. Some journals have specific rules for the number of citations. Therefore, it is suggested to consider the journal's rules before finalizing the number of citations in your paper. Most of the journals accept websites in the citation. If a scientific document is cited, make sure that the DOI of the document is mentioned in the citation. Try to dedicate about 10% of your references to the journal that you aim to submit your paper there. If you do not have any references from the journal, the editor or reviewers can claim that your work is unrelated and might reject your paper. Self-citation is not forbidden. It means you can cite 1, 2, or 3 of your previous published papers in your current article. However, do not cite unrelated documents. Also, Do not cite more than 3 articles from your Various journals have different citation methods. Consider the journal's rules in this case. It is highly recommended to use software such as Mendeley for citation. If you use Mendeley or other software for citation, double-check the references when you finalize your manuscript. Sometimes the employed software do not import the details completely, and you need to amend them manually. Before submitting your paper, check the similarity of your manuscript by a software such as Turnitin. Try to minimize the similarity of your manuscript. Keep the similarity below 20%, excluding references. If the similarity of your manuscript with a single document is more than 5%, try to decrease it as much as you can.